Good afternoon, and welcome to this week's episode of Supply Chain Talk. My name's Alistair Chariton, and I'm hosting this week's episode. Our main topic today is From Afterthought to Essential, Optimizing Electronic Sourcing in Your Procurement Strategy. And before that, we'll be discussing a topical news item. As a reminder, please do join the chat by opening the chat panel. If you're logged in on Zoom, you'll be able to do that. If you're on LinkedIn, you won't be able to participate. So do switch across if you're able to. And as is usually the case, we will be awarding a Supply Chain Talk mug to the contribution we find most useful today. And we'll try and respond to as many questions and comments as we can. So let me introduce my first guest, who is Varun Narayanan, who is Global Category Director at Gilbarco Vida Route, which is part of Vontier Corporation. He's based in North Carolina in the US. And in his role as Global Category Director for Electronics at Gilbarco, Varun leads initiatives to strengthen supplier relationships and enhance design processes with key component manufacturers and EMS partners. And Varun was previously at Vida Route, where he led a 25-person supply chain team managing diverse categories. He holds a master's in industrial and manufacturing engineering from Penn State and a bachelor's in mechanical engineering from COEP Technological University in Pune, India. And away from work, Varun plays guitar for a heavy metal band in India and in the US. So welcome, Varun.
Thank you very much for having me, Alistair. Hello.
My pleasure, Varun. My second guest is Nanda Kishore, who is VP of Sourcing at Evoy, based in Norway. And Nanda is an accomplished supply chain executive with over 28 years of global experience from automotive, heavy engineering, and manufacturing sectors. He's based in Norway and is an avid outdoor person. He likes to run half marathons and also high altitude mountaineering. And his most recent summit was Mira Peak in the Himalayas, which is close to 6,500 meters altitude. So welcome, Nanda, a regular guest of the program. Our third guest is Luis Taraco, who is Indirect Procurement Sourcing Manager at NAM Schneider Electric, based in the major industrial city of Monterrey in Mexico. Luis has 15 years of experience in supply chain management in the consumer goods and manufacturing sectors, and he's a big car enthusiast who has never actually worked in the automotive industry, although he follows it constantly. I wish we had time to discuss Jaguar's rebranding and concept model, which has been getting a heck of a lot of press coverage in the UK, but we'll have to leave opinions on that till another time. And finally, we're joined by Ken Bradley, who is founder and chief strategy officer at Lightica Incorp. And he's based in Ottawa, Canada. In his career as an electrical engineer, Ken worked in engineering and in executive roles on the development and manufacturing of semiconductor devices at American Microsystems, Bell Northern Research, and at Nortel Semiconductor. And among his roles at Nortel, he was Chief Procurement Officer and Senior Managing Director of the joint venture Guangdong Nortel Switching. And during his time in China, Ken also negotiated two other joint ventures to enable transfer of silicon semiconductor technology to China. And it's well known at Lightica that he likes his dog, because he was explaining how his modest-sized dog is often walking around on his desk during Zoom periods, but is sadly absent today from joining the episode. So welcome, Ken, and my other three guests.
It's great to be here.
Good, good. So our news story today is a very topical one about tariffs. It's headed up Trump's tariffs, a wild card for the markets in 2025. Price hikes are possible, and diverse supply chains are a must. So a rather lengthy title, and it was published in morningstar.co.uk. And probably everyone's familiar, but just as a quick reminder, the real key, latest on the tariffs is that President-elect Donald Trump has announced that he's going to impose broad new tariffs on Mexico, Canada, and China on his first day in office. And he said that Mexico and Canada would be subject to 25% levies on all products, while China will be subject to an additional 10% additional tariff on top of anything else. So major questions about what does this mean in particular for American companies. And the article talks about three key approaches to tariffs that companies have talked about. The first thing is price increases. So basically saying if imports are going to cost more, many companies are going to say they're going to have to just pass on that increased product cost to the consumer. And it mentions Stanley Black & Decker, Logitech, and Matteo and Versa are just some of the examples, as well as Lower and AutoZone. So some of the examples of companies who have said that's what they're going to have to do. A second option is to try and diversify supply chains away from China, and quite a few companies across different industries are already saying that they're turning elsewhere. And finally, the other approach, which is kind of only a short-term approach, is to stockpile extra inventory. So to get that product into the country, into the US, before the tariffs take effect. Though clearly, if they actually take effect in January, there's not much time to ship stuff across the world if it's coming from China and the like. But the article does say, of course, that is can be a prudent approach, but it can come at the cost of cash and liquidity. So three interesting options outlined there. And I think, just in general, especially with some of my guests today being based in Mexico, what is alarming about these tariffs is that they're specifically targeting Canada and Mexico, which are part of the North American Free Trade Agreement. So if it's targeting NAFTA, and companies may well have reshored or nearshored rather their procurement or manufacturing to Canada and Mexico because they're part of NAFTA, and suddenly they're really going to get caught out, if these tariffs come to pass. So, turning first of all, Varun, to you, what are your thoughts about the options mentioned of price hikes, supply chain adjustments, or just stocking up on inventory?
Yeah, thanks for the question, Alistair. No, I think, look, I think tariffs is nothing new. So I don't think the businesses should be terribly surprised in terms of how we respond to it. Back in 2018, when the first tariffs were implemented, everybody was reacting and it was a much heavier lift. Now it should be really dusting the playbook and just being prepared on executing the plan, right? And when it comes to the Mexico tariffs or Canada tariffs, as was mentioned, our view is that it's a negotiation tactic to solve a very different problem as compared to what he is doing with China. China was all about unfair trade practices, and he wants to penalize China, and that's why those tariffs are here to stay. It's why the Biden administration not only continued it, but have increased it to 50% on some key technologies going into effect here in the next 30 days. We don't think the Mexico tariffs will stay for long, but with regards to the countermeasures, right, price hikes and stockpiling inventory and diversifying supply chains, I think all those three options should be on the table. It's a matter of how complex your supply chain is with regards to exposure. Again, with China, as the article said, and this is true for our business as well, we have reduced our exposure significantly to China. And that is an ongoing endeavor. It's not something that we stopped. And so I think a combination of all the three is the likely scenario. Which one will be higher compared to the other is a function of what your exposure is.
Okay, thank you, Varun. Ananda, how about you? I mean, I know you're based in Norway, so are these going to be issues to concern you, or so interested in your viewpoint on the options?
No, I don't think it will affect us at the moment, but still, I have my own reservation again how this will be implemented, because this will have a cascading effect on consumer costs and also has an influence on inflation, etc. I think it's more of a political statement, but we can expect some tariffs. And I agree with Varun, tariffs are nothing new to businesses. I think the most sustainable approach in these cases, or in every case, is strategic supply chain adjustment. Diversifying suppliers across stable regions and leveraging long-term partnerships to build resilience against external shocks like these tariffs. And this has to be a continual process, not when somebody announces a tariff, we look around. It has to be a continual process. And then for sake of numbers, China accounts, even though it looks major, it accounts for about 34% of the export in the electronic market. It's about 1.4 trillion US dollar. So positive side, we have 66% produced elsewhere. So alternatively, Vietnam and Malaysia are emerging as a very viable options. We have seen huge investment from companies like SpaceX. So there are options available. So we just need to constantly look around and find the best solution.
Okay, that's great, Nandra. I'm sure we'll come back to that in one of our sort of further points in a moment. And Lewis, I mean, that you're in the thick of it, I guess, in Mexico, in a big manufacturing city there. What are you seeing as the most important strategies here?
No, I agree at that point. Like point of view that at the end, the diversification is key here, and these decisions to whether you're relocating are strategic decisions. So yeah, there's an impact on tariff, but you don't make a decision like on the short term. So we have to understand what's behind these decisions and what's going to be permanent or not, and that could move you into what stays, what goes. Do you need to do any difference within the mix that you currently have on your supply baseline? And I think that's it.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. And Ken, finally, I'm sure you're talking to a lot of your clients about these issues. What is your advice? Don't worry, it's going to blow over, or what do you think of the article?
Well, you never know, because Trump is if you never can guess what he's going to do next. From a purchasing perspective, though, I think that what's happening is actually either brilliant or good luck. Because by announcing the possibility of tariffs, he's got every business and every politician in Canada and in Mexico looking at what they can give up in order to not have tariffs. So he's already created leverage for himself, even if nothing happens. If he does introduce tariffs, it's going to be difficult for both countries for a period of time, and all of the things that are mentioned in terms of price increases and need for inventory, all of that's going to come into play. So if I look at it from an American perspective, if I'm an American company and I am exporting, what I can do is easily change my sources of supply, my EMS companies, to use international companies, and the tariffs don't matter to me at all. So my export market is completely covered. And internally, like, a tariff is really a combination of a tax, consumption tax, and a subsidy. So if the costs go up, he can always offset the tariff with some kind of tax increase, and politically he'll be all right if he sort of balances the two. So for the actual consumer, it doesn't necessarily hurt that much if he makes countermeasures. From a subsidy perspective, what he's doing is he's taking the poor performing companies in the US that can't compete internationally, and he's giving them a subsidy. And that will allow him to get the efficiency out of these companies that you would get if you invested in government or bureaucracy. So what happens is the poorly performing companies get rewarded with no need to improve. And so they're not going to become competitive. It's not going to have the effect you want. In fact, the first thing is by making it so that the stuff that would have been exports is made internationally now, he's actually taken jobs out of the US, and he's actually funding companies that are inefficient to remain inefficient. And so I think it's not a wise thing to do, but he's an erratic man, and it's either genius or good luck. So I'm waiting to see what happens on December the 4th, 5th, and 6th.
Yeah.
And in the months that
Absolutely. No, so really it's some very interesting perspectives there. As you say, it's sort of, it's well known in economic circles that tariffs are not an efficient way of getting productivity and balancing trade. And as you say, it could be a genius negotiating point, or it could be a bit of a bad move. Thank you for those perspectives. Yeah. Let's move on now to our main topic. And as a reminder, it's from afterthought to essential: optimizing electronic sourcing in your procurement strategy. And Ken, I'll just first sort of turn back to you just very briefly, because you've had a lifetime of sourcing electronic components and advising how best to do that. So why was it that sourcing electronic components used to be an afterthought?
Well, a lot of companies that are out there have not always had a lot of electronic component content in their products. The big industrial companies, where it's machines and rubber and those kind of things. So the procurement that has to happen with electronic components is a little different. Also, if you take a look at a lot of companies, purchasing was always something that was buried in manufacturing. And it was, the very few procurement people, unless you're in one of these industries where material cost is extremely important to you, they weren't really part of the C-suite. And then all of a sudden we got into COVID, and then we got into shortages and semiconductor shortages. And every CEO realized that his supply chain was the most important thing that he had. When he couldn't deliver or she couldn't deliver, supply chain became the most important thing. Prior to that, if you look at who was in the C-suite, it was always the marketing people, the sales people, the technology people, and there was always an accountant in the room. So, there was always, those were the definite C-suite people. Now you're getting chief procurement officers that are in the role because it's recognized that sourcing, risk, managing risk, availability of material is the thing that makes the company run. If you can't fill an order, you lose the customer. If you can't get the parts, you can't do a new design, So it's the actual ability to source and create leverage so that you get preferred treatment in shortage periods, in allocation, better pricing. It's also critically important to the future of any business now. And so procurement is now at the table like everybody else. So it's a major transition in terms of the perspective on procurement, the skills that are needed in procurement. It's all increased, and its importance is many, many times what it was, say, 5-6 years ago.
Great. No, thank you, Ken. That's a great way of explaining the context for our discussion. So our first discussion point is best practices for mitigating pricing risks in an increasingly volatile electronics market. So as Ken explained, of course, with COVID and other factors, it's been a volatile market in terms of availability and supply. And we've discussed the impact of price rises through tariffs, but what about price rises through other factors like material shortages or manufacturing costs? So Varun, what do you consider best practices in those sort of situations?
Yeah, I think generally speaking, within electronics, and frankly speaking, any negotiation, right? If there is a price increase, the first answer is always no. The second answer is always no, and the third answer is always no, right? The whole point is you delay as much as possible getting the increase. But frankly speaking, the way you mitigate it is having multiple sources approved on your AVL, right? Being able to generate competition between the different manufacturers. And again, I'm speaking more for electronics. You can, of course, do that for other categories as well. So the more options you have on your approved vendor list or an AVL, the better chance you have to mitigate the price increases. Many times the increases are opportunistic in nature. You're savvy enough, I'd say 7 out of 10 occasions, they don't come back with increases, or they stop the conversation for a while and they'll come back 6 months later, 8 months later. Again, electronic supply chain is very complicated, right? Material shortages, a fab deciding to increase pricing on legacy technology nodes because they're allocating capacity for advanced nodes. Those are things that are completely beyond your control. And so your best options are having a diversified AVL, in my opinion.
Okay, thank you. Great insights. Nando, would you agree? Diversifying and also it sounds like just kind of bluffing them out and negotiating hard in response.
Yeah, I have a different approach. And I think we are talking about proactive and multifaceted strategies, right? The best practices we spoke about, which includes, I would like to include predictive analytics to anticipate shortages, adapting design to cost approaches to optimize material usage. And my favorite thing, which I've been adopting, is collaborating with suppliers and value engineering to reduce production costs. Because this collaboration is most sustainable for any companies to have. Additionally, diversifying sourcing regions, fostering long-term relationships, all of those help in securing stable prices. But we have seen increasing trend, at least I have seen increasing trend of forward contracts and hedging strategies to mitigate financial risk from market fluctuations. Because we saw this post-semiconductor crisis, it's still happening, but it's sort of tapered down. these things have come into play. And also, as Ken mentioned, you have some of accountant or financial guys sitting on the C-suits, and they like to hear these things, forward contracts and hedging strategies. It's music to their ears.
Okay, some great strategies to try there as well. Thank you, Lewis. What are your thoughts on handling price rises?
I mean, I'd separate here, mitigation from contingency, because obviously, if you can foresee this with, anything related to analytical, try to do some pre-work and try to, in electronics and some other things, you can always, work for any improvement or anything that you could do to avoid this impact as much as possible. And obviously, when there's a contingency and definitely there's going to be an impact, I think that the first thing would be to assure supply, just to build that supply relationship management, to make sure that you're going to be one of the first options and that you're going to be assuring the supply of these components. And after that, then try to see how can you work with this price increase. I agree with Baron. Try to stop this as much as you can. And there's going if it's a shortage of raw material, talking about, for instance, rare materials that they're more critical, or that could be more potentially shortage. Making sure that is a reality and it is just a threat of one of the suppliers. So having that, winning that time to make sure that you have some other options and that you're really getting what's fair, right? And you negotiate and you get to a point what could be fair for both.
Okay. Thank you, Lewis.
Alistair, if I can jump in just real quick, right?
Yeah.
One of the things I'll say, right? Everything Nanda mentioned is certainly accurate, right? The key there is, things like forward contracts, hedging, value engineering are all continuous activities that you are doing consistently. It's not something that you can start when a supplier comes and says, I would like to pass on an increase, right? You're already in a defensive position at that time, right? And so the best position when you're on the back foot is push back as much as you can. And then obviously the best way to protect yourself is in the design cycle, right? Let's be very clear that 70 to 80% of the costs are typically locked in at the time of design of a product. And if you've chosen the right supply partners, you've chosen the right and established the right rules of engagement, those are things that will ultimately serve you well, even if things dramatically change in the marketplace, such as is what happened in COVID, right? You have protection in the form of contracts and things of that nature. But if you're left unprotected, then you fall back to standard, defensive mechanisms to push back against price increases.
Yeah, and it's a great reminder that this isn't just a simple procurement sort of kind of transaction. It's part of a much wider supply chain, and supply chains mean not just sourcing through to kind of customer delivery. They mean actually product design, new product introduction. So a great reminder. Ken, turning back to you. We've heard lots of different approaches there. What would your advice be?
Well, I've been thinking a lot about purchasing since I got into purchasing towards the end of my career, actually. And I think today, when I look at purchasing, to me, it's all about creating leverage. And in fact, I created a company, and its mandate is just to help companies create leverage for negotiation. And that's negotiation for price. It's negotiation for, assurance of supply. It's negotiation for compliance. And so with Lytica, I spend a lot of time thinking about that. And, what we do as a company is we help people essentially identify areas where they can get leverage through things like have been mentioned here. Like, do you have the right alternate sources? Do you have a good relationship with your suppliers? How do you rank your suppliers so that you know which ones are working in your best interests and which ones are just milking you? Have you benchmarked your supply chain so you know who's good and who's not good? One thing that's not often talked about, but I know myself, is my reaction in different negotiations to people who are adjusting to my culture or I'm adjusting to theirs really helps. because I can get quite irritated if somebody comes at me and attacks what I'm trying to say, as opposed to having a conversation that makes sense. And so that whole area of relationship, where if you can watch the person you're negotiating with and with their behavior, adjust your behavior so that you get really good connection, that helps in creating leverage. So leverage comes from so many different areas. It comes from having options. It comes from relationship. It comes from, you can just go down a long, long list. And so I think for all of these things, whether you want to have best practices for mitigating price, it's really think through your business processes and what are you doing that's taking away your leverage, example being bad behavior, and what are you doing to increase your leverage, like having options, like being able to rank your suppliers and know which ones are working on your behalf, being able to rank your manufacturers, understand what potential business you have coming so that you can add that to the opportunity, use your allocation. Like if somebody has an allocation and they're giving a third to 3 different companies, why are they doing that? Like, why wouldn't you give it all to one? Maybe you have half your capacitor business with one guy and half your capacitor business with another. You got 100% with each for the parts that are there, rather than having one guy giving you one at a penny, one guy giving you one at a penny and a half, and another guy giving you one at 2 cents, right? So
Yeah.
it's just, how do you optimize that to be best for the manufacturer, give you the most secure supply chain, and it all comes down to how are you creating leverage with everything that you have that can create leverage, and how do you stop taking leverage away from your negotiation by strengthening your supplier because you're not paying on time or because you're, whatever the detractor is. So
Okay,
that's
no,
my input.
a lot of great advice there. Let's move on because we've got a few more points to cover. But a lot of really great initiatives suggested there, and actually what you were just saying, Ken, leads very nicely to our second discussion point, which is strategies for optimizing preferred supplier relationships to drive better outcomes. And I guess, in a way, what you were saying there, Ken, is that sometimes to develop a preferred supplier, preferred customer relationship, you may be wanting to put a lot more purchasing through a single channel, a single vendor. But is the risk there that you have fewer options, when it comes to tariffs or shortages or a problem at that specific supplier? So so what are the effective strategies here? Varun, turning to you, your thoughts on getting that optimized preferred supplier relationship?
Yeah. So again, when I think about from an electronics space, right? I think one of the things we really need to understand is how are you defining a preferred supplier, right? Generally speaking, we tend to do it on standard, supplier scorecards, their performance and quality, delivery, and cost. And if they've done well and they've achieved, certain targets that you've set, you tend to make them preferred. But that's really foundational, purchasing metrics that you're basing it out on. One of the things that we've started doing recently in the last few years is we pay a lot of attention to relationship alignment. If I'm looking at a supplier as preferred based on my criteria, are they looking at us as a strategic customer? Because when you have relationship alignment, you really don't understand the value of the relationship until something goes south. And how do they respond when things are not working well, whether it's something that they've created or some external shocks have caused that situation. And so being really clear about it, and you've got tools like the Kralich matrix, you've got customer segmentation, and taking the time to understand where you put your suppliers and how do you think your suppliers are putting you in the customer segmentation that you're doing, right? You're looking for evidence in past actions that have been done. When we were out of a part and it was an issue that maybe they had created, did they go the extra mile to help you, or was the conversation more transactional in nature? Oh, you'll get your components 3 months from now. Sorry, can't help you. Can't do anything more for you. So we tend to look at preferred suppliers. Yes, you've got the standard criterias that exist, but we look for evidence in terms of how they have actually, what's their say-do ratio? Is it consistent, or are they saying one thing and doing something completely different? That's typically what we look for, and we start moving business, from one supplier to the other if they're not meeting the standards that we've established.
Great, thank you, Varun. Nanda, what are your thoughts on how you work with your preferred suppliers and develop them?
No, I was just thinking what to answer for that. But I would also like to mention, with your permission, Alistair, refer to a comment from Louis and also what Varun mentioned. Now, Louis mentioned that it's not easy or it's not possible to foresee everything, which is true. But then remember what Ken mentioned. Almost over a decade back, I was instrumental in implementing something called as a balance scorecard. So on supply chain, so this is something a very important tool for anybody in a supply chain or procurement department to be able to follow it, so that you don't end up, as Varun said, these processes have to be continually implemented. These are not something. These are not band-aid type of remedies. So the company has to be doing things very, very proactively. Back to the comment point you mentioned, historically, supply chains have been talking about target suppliers. Target suppliers are defined as where you have 80% of your spend coming from a bunch of suppliers. But of late, this has moved on to preferred supplier. So what's a preferred supplier? Preferred supplier relationships are not inherently single source as people think. So rather, they are structured to include multiple options within the framework, ensuring flexibility. It doesn't mean that you go with one, it's a preference. Preference can change. Preference is based on what's the need of the hour, need of the project, need of the design, but then that doesn't mean that that's a single source. So people have to always have options, and that's what we talk about as supply chain design. That's the most vital thing in any organization. You need to have a supply chain design, because electronics design per se is very complex till now. I would say till now, because I've tasted the AI usage of AI, and that's opening up, across borders. You are easy to pick up unless people, you saw engineers going through catalogs, finding out the numbers. Now you click on a click of a button, you get variable options. So
Yeah.
it's the
Okay.
it's simplified. So preferred supplier relationship will be much easier to leverage on AI,
Yeah.
actually.
Okay. Thank you. Some more dimensions to think about there. Moving to you, Louis. Lewis, what would you like to add to those points?
I think that a lot of things have been said related to this point, and yeah, I mean, you could have like 3 preferred suppliers for this specific electronic component, but at the end, what guides you is what's not only the guidelines you do to make them a preferred supplier, but actually who is actually going with your strategy in case you need a change, who is quicker to respond, in case you have a shortage, in case you need something additional, an additional effort, something related to technology, whoever that goes with you. I think that's something that at the end you should consider who is your real partner when you're working with preferred suppliers. And that will actually make it work for the company, to make sure that we use that preferred supplier, because we may have defined a preferred supplier, but that in the reality is not delivering, then you may have some spent going to some other suppliers because that one is not actually giving you the what you really need.
Okay, thank you, Lewis. And then finally, Ken, your thoughts on dealing with and optimizing preferred supplier relationships.
Well, if you're going to have a preferred supplier, there has to be something in it for both of you. And I mean, what you're giving them is some assurance of business, and giving them preferred access to new designs and this kind of thing. I think there's some table stakes that have to be met in terms of service and quality. That like, let's put it this way: if you're not getting the service and quality, take them off your approved vendor list completely anyway. So you'd say, well, why would I only have preferred ones if everybody's giving me good service and good quality? And to me, it really comes down to you're looking for a partner who can get your time to market down. Particularly important as there's this acceleration in the semiconductor industry and in software that's just bringing in new products at a completely unheard of rate of change. And so what you're really looking for is somebody that fits your business direction and your size and scale, but can really accelerate your time to market in terms of helping you with the choice, helping you with your design, helping you with all of those things, early samples, accelerating your time to qualification. And at the same time that they're doing that, they're setting up a program so that you're protected from risk. And so you need to understand, and they need to be willing to share with you those things that are making you understand their single points of failure or their choke points in the supply chain. So it's a relationship where they have to be open with you, but at the same time, the result has to be, you've got to meet my threshold on quality and service and price, and you got to help me get to market faster.
Okay, and some great points there, Ken. And I think it's a fantastic reminder that too often in the past, in traditional procurement, just cost was everything. And we've all talked about, the accountants in the boardroom, and they just drive costs down. But it's truly understanding the true cost and benefit of a supplier who may not be the cheapest by a long way, but if they can give you some other huge benefits, that's worth a lot more. So
it's interesting. Reminder. It's interesting in the C-suite. The procurement manager should be telling the technology guys which suppliers they should be using. They should understand what that technology direction of the company is, so they can be telling him, don't use that guy, it's short-term thinking, use this other guy, he's got a better product in the long run. That's a big change for purchasing, a huge change for
much broader understanding.
Alistair, just adding maybe just one point on exactly what Ken said. I'll say it in less than 30 seconds, right? So I think Nanda mentioned about the balanced scorecard, right? One of the things that we would encourage, and we've made this change internally, again, with electronic components, we have a clear way to tie it back to the revenue impact. And we very quickly found out that there might be, as Nanda was mentioning, 20% of the suppliers, 80% of your spend. That's usually the textbook starting point to look at. Well, you find plenty of components that don't make it as part of the 20% of the suppliers that can have a substantially large impact on the revenue for your business. And so one of the things in our preferred supplier, dimension is how much revenue are they impacting? And you just need to be very clear. There are certain technologies where you cannot have multiple options. You think about processors, FPGAs, GPUs, you're not going to qualify multiple sources. It's cost prohibitive. You just have to be very clear on the revenue impact, and everything Ken mentioned should be looked at when you're deciding to go all in with that single supplier, and that they meet these risk criteria that are important for you.
Thank you, Varun. Yeah, great perspective there. So our final discussion point is proven methods for improving cost management in this fast evolving commodity. And I think we've already talked in a way about cost management and the fact that it's a much wider picture. And of course we've been focusing on electronic sourcing, but I think really everything that's been discussed is relevant to almost any fast evolving sector of procurement. So turning to you again, Varun, your final thoughts in terms of how do you improve cost management in fast evolving commodities?
I think I'll probably point to what Ken said, right? At the end of the day, it's about finding leverage, and that leverage applies to improving your existing cost position as well as mitigating price risk. All of this is tied together, right? None of this is independently standing, and there is one discrete action that you take for addressing a particular piece of it. What we effectively do is, we work with our suppliers as quarterly benchmarking that we're doing to make sure that their pricing is competitive. We have access to predictive analytics, some of the things that was mentioned in the previous topics that we use. More importantly, we are trying to optimize the cost at the design cycle, because again, 70 to 80% of the cost is locked in, at least for electronics, for sure, in the very early stages of the design cycle. So we spend a lot of time making sure that we get the right suppliers for the right technology at the right price. And you find leverage in the design cycle versus after a design is released. So that's our approach that we take today.
Okay, thank you, Varun. Ananda, your thoughts on cost management?
I would say, Alistair, procurement traditionally is known for 4 R's. Right price, right quality, right quantity, and right time. So all of this cost and the hype around cost is we have to look at any company who's a customer to another company who's a supplier is also a supplier to its customer. So we need to look at cost from a perspective of what it means to each one of them. So it's not about one company trying to negotiate a price which he thinks is the best, but the customer may not like it. The collaboration is key here. I would say that more than cost, collaboration has to be like a DNA in any organization. So you need to learn to collaborate internally, externally, and then you will figure out together what's the best cost for the market. Because the cost varies. You take 10 years time to go to market, the cost is different than 1 month. So
Absolutely.
what's the need? So that's where the collaboration is very key, and it should start from within the organization actually. Then it helps to go into outside. So cost will come
Yeah.
naturally. There is a cost, but it shouldn't be passed on from one end to another end. So
No,
that's what I meant here.
it's almost should be value management,
Spot on.
not cost
Yes,
management.
value
It's
is
so
important. Value is
much
important.
That's right.
yeah. Lewis, turning to you, your thoughts on cost management or value management?
Oh, definitely collaboration is really important and it's key. And I think that I could divide a little bit this, like, you could have components that could be a little bit more commoditized that are, continually used, changing. And in there, it's, it is even more relevant, that part. But then you have, and obviously tracking and monitoring, but then you have this other part of collaboration in which you're starting to build something new, like a new technology or something that could be like an exclusive component for you or an exclusive technology, and then then there's another component of collaboration that you're building that partnership, and at the end you want to make sure that you're ahead and you're bringing something new to the market. And there's a different side of the collaboration you need to do in here, and that at the end there's an impact to cost management and value management.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. And finally, Ken, turning back to you, your advice to our audience on cost management or value management.
Well, yeah. So what you're doing is you're hitting right at what my company does. I mean, first of all, since we're saying value management, that really comes down to price, security of supply, and compliance.
Hmm.
And so what you need to do is you need to benchmark to find out how you are in the industry. And of course, what we do is we use our customer data to tell us what the market is. So we have market models. So we're able to tell you where you fit in the model. So we know where you are in the market. And so, if you're measuring your cost improvement based on not where you are in the market, but how you did compared with last year, as Varun said, if you didn't get involved in the design cycle, you may be paying 25% too much for a part and you're happy with 5% of your cost reduction.
Yes.
So you need to benchmark in the market to find out where you sit in the marketplace before you can even think about cost improvement, because you don't know how far off you are.
Mm.
Or you may be putting too much effort into something where you already are a market leader, and you've got left all this stuff that's on the tail where you got millions of dollars of possible savings, and you think, oh, my EMS is looking after that, I don't have to worry about that. Well, they're looking after themselves as well, even though they're great companies, right? I mean, it's just natural. So that's the first point. The second point is, what's fast evolving mean? We know that the industry is moving very fast, but are you actually moving very fast? Are your products more stable and you've got things that could use a refresh, and the cost would come down a lot with a refresh and security of supply would go up if you had a design refresh? So you really need to understand, how fast is the market actually moving, and should you be moving as quickly as the market? And again, I'm back to, hey, I started a company for this because I find it fascinating. And when you're retired from one company and you're getting, as aged as I am, it's really nice to be able to work on things that are of real interest and real importance. And all I can say is you've got a benchmark to know where you're at, and then you can put plans around how you get better.
Yeah. Thank you,
I'll
Ken.
help you with that. So.
Yeah, well, I think there's been some fantastic advice here, and I think we can all recognise in the audience that this applies not just to electronics, but to really any area of sourcing of critical products and materials to your supply chains, and it just brings home how many dimensions there are to consider and how many different things to leverage, not just price and cost is just the simplest or smallest part of it. It's a much wider perspective. So thank you very much to my guests for those great insights. Our next episode is not until next year. So here we are, 3 weeks from Christmas. And our next episode, in fact, isn't until the 15th of January, same time, 4 p.m. UK time. And our subject then is a supply chain that's more visible to you and the board. So actually, a lot of it is about communicating to the board. So that'll be an interesting discussion. So thank you again to my 4 guests, Varun Narayanan from Gilbarco Vida Root, Nanda Kishore from Evoy, Louis Tarraco from Schneider Electric, and finally Ken Bradley from Lightica. Thank you, all 4 of you, for some great insights there. Thank you, audience, for joining us, and do join us in the new year after a very enjoyable holiday season for those of you enjoying the holiday season. So we'll see you next year. Goodbye.